Henry James is not going to start his work like, now this is a very high class of this society. No, he is going to come to the point and he will tell you these are ceremonies that are extremely important. There are circumstances in which whether you partake of the tea or not, some people of course never do. The situation is in itself delightful. Okay. It is supposed to be a very sophisticated and elegant kind of a ceremony, a delightful, and people have to behave themselves, they have to be, in other words, at their best. Yeah. It reveals them. So, they reveal themselves at ceremonies such as these. They dress for tea, they dress for dinner. So, every situation, every circumstance is in other words, a performance. Okay. Have we talked about these things? Yeah. In one of our early courses, we have talked about performance is not just what we do on a stage, all the world is a stage. Okay. Ceremonies like a very commonplace situation like having an afternoon tea is also a ceremony where people perform. In New York society, in London society, belonging to this particular class, to the society to which these people belong to, people are always performing. Okay. So, this is the most important aspect. Performance, everybody performs, and our heroine Isabel Archer regrettably fails to see through these performances. Okay. And the idea is very clear, she is an American. Okay. She is an American girl, she does not have that capacity to perform. Okay. So, she would not be artist, she is a natural honest girl, and we have already talked about another natural honest girl, Daisy Miller. So, we continue with interior monologue in Henry James, and when we know that sometimes he spends pages on fleeting impressions and its many ramifications. Henry James believed characterization is what makes stories and novels so personal. So, character is destiny. Again, I cannot stress enough on the relevance and significance of characters in and characterization in Henry James. And Henry James very effectively employs the techniques of point of view, interior monologue, and the unreliable narrator. So, the key features. Now, we are going to talk about the fiction of Henry James, and these are the important features of Henry James. Interior monologue, psychological realities, points of view, narration. In his The Art of Fiction, which was published in 1884, it is an essay, he argued for the fullest possible freedom in the novelist's choice of theme and treatment. And he redefines experience as the subject matter of fiction and marks a crucial shift of realist fiction towards psychological realism. And this leads us towards modernist fiction. We have been talking about stream of consciousness, psychological realism and stream of consciousness. For Henry James, novel is the ultimate art form, okay? And his ideas about form and points of view, and also having the proper reader. Now, why do you think that Henry James demands a proper reader? You are aware, of course, I am sure, Wolfgang Iser and the yes, but Wolfgang Iser gives us a term, the implied reader. Okay. You have an implied reader. Who is he? A writer writes his fiction pitching his level towards a particular kind of reader. Do we agree to that? Okay. Yeah. all writers have a specific reader in mind. Do you think that is necessary for any writer to do that? To have a specific kind of readership. We are talking about readership now. Henry James is that kind of a writer who had a specific, who consciously wrote about a specific readership. So, it is not for all, it is for a specific readership. So, proper reader. Therefore, the kind of fiction he wrote is not meant to be understood. Therefore, in the beginning what did I tell you about his style? Give me those few words. Pragya, do you remember? Style of Henry James.
Tentative.
Good. Tentative, obscure, clue chasing. Yeah. Now, when the style of writing is tentative, obscure and chasing clues, it cannot be for the masses. Do we agree to that? It has to be for a specific niche kind of a group, and that is what he means by the proper reader. There should be a proper readership. Okay. And rather than his, now he wrote in, and therefore we attach so much of significance to Henry James's position as a novelist, because till he came on the scene, novel writing was considered a form of entertainment, okay, a mass entertainment. You remember serialized novels? You keep on stretching a concept, okay, like a chewing gum till it snaps. Okay. Why? Because people like to read a story. So, keep on giving them a serialized kind of a novel, and once you are done with that, put everything together and bring out a novel. That is not what he did. Okay. So, for him novel writing is not a way of entertaining, but rather for exploring the psychology of the characters, and therefore, this requires not a mass readership, but a specific readership. So, he brought the art of writing fiction and novel writing, he put the whole thing, and he raised the standards to from where they were. Okay. Now, this is a quote from his Art of Fiction: "Experience is never limited and it is never complete. It is an immense sensibility, a kind of huge spider web of the finest silken threads suspended in the chamber of consciousness and catching every airborne particle in its tissue. It is the very atmosphere of the mind." Go through this. Experience is never limited, never complete. It is an immense sensibility, a kind of huge spider web of the finest silken threads suspended in the chamber of consciousness and catching every airborne particle in its tissue. What is he talking about? Do you remember? I will come to you, Ashmita. Do you remember you told me once that you have read The Great Gatsby. So, how does Nick Carraway describe The Great Gatsby? In one of the first, can you connect these lines to Gatsby's character?
No Gatsby complete.
No, but that is not. I am talking about this heightened sense of sensibility and sensitivity, like a suspended huge spider trying to catch every airborne particle, to imbibe, to catch everything that is visible as well as invisible. Every airborne particle is not visible to us, right? Having such super refined sensibilities, a writer, a novelist should have, and that is how Nick Carraway describes Gatsby. In other words, he uses some other words to describe, but the idea is the same. Gatsby is a man of super refined aesthetic sensibilities and feelings. He feels too much. Okay, he is unable to let go. That is his problem. Okay, that is what Henry James says, that is how a novelist should be able to imbibe every kind of experience and should be able to feel every kind of an experience. like a spider catching in its web every airborne particle. Any comments here? Okay.
Point of view, multiple points of view in the technique that he uses, right?
Yes, and also his extreme sensitivity and extreme attention to experience, to catching experience and to portray all kinds of experiences. Okay, this is important. Now, James and his dialectics, he constantly probes the basic terms of critical discussion, and this is again we are going back to Henry James as a critic. So, he talks about life, representation, one of the first people to talk about these things in contemporary and modern day criticism. Of course, the idea of representation has been discussed since the times of the classical writers. I am sure you are aware of Plato and Aristotle. They have also talked about mimesis and representations, but here James also talks about representations, interest of what? Writer's interest in people, experiences, reality, form of a novel. This is extremely important, form of a novel. Before that, writers, novelists did not pay much attention to the form of a novel, but here we are talking about plot. He actually started theorizing plot. He actually started theorizing characters more suitable to the 20th century reader. Of course, we all, again I am going back to our classic writers, Aristotle, and I have done quite a bit of Aristotle with you people. So, Aristotle has already talked about what is a plot, what is a tragedy, who is an ideal tragic hero. It has all been done, but here he foregrounds character, okay, and he defines plot and then compares plot with character. So, as he foregrounds character, he says and he asks, what is character but the determination of incident? That means, incident is determined by character. What is incident but the illustration of character? How an incident is shaped or informed it completely depends on the character. So, character drives. Everything is derived from character. I like you to compare this with E.M. Foster's in his aspects of novel, which I am sure you have done. Okay. Are you familiar? Not yet? Okay. So, there are two great English writers. Oh no, this is the seminal work. This you have to know. So, Passage to India. Yeah. So, E.M. Foster, his aspect of the novel, and Walter Allen, I am not talking about Walter Allen here, but you should note him, the English novel. Okay, these are the two 20th century critics who have explained and who have gone at length to explain to us what is the meaning of plot, character and novel in general. Now, E.M. Foster in Aspects of the Novel, published in 1927, he discriminates between flat and round characters. I am sure you are aware of this, flat and round characters. Now, flat character is a stock character, a stock character, a stock situation. I think I have done all these things when I was doing drama. Yes. Two-dimensional characters. So, as opposed to three-dimensional characters. So, a stock character, in other words, is flat. It does not have too much of development or growth. Sometimes it is interesting in particular situation. because you see the earlier versions of superheroes. Who are our superheroes? Superman, Batman, Spider-Man. Are they very rounded characters? Yeah, I am talking about the earlier days of these comic book heroes. Were they very well rounded? Yes or no? Okay. And when did this roundness come? When people like Frank Miller stepped in, and then you have Christopher Nolan who redefined Batman and the entire superhero genre. Even earlier that earlier also we had someone like Tim Burton who did a series of Batman movies. Okay, so he started looking at the darker sides of Batman. Batman earlier was never like this. When at the inception of Batman, the character was always flat. He is a caped crusader. That's it. So, there are no stream of consciousness. Okay, there is no angst, but now Christopher Nolan's hero is an angst-ridden hero, and we all know that. There's sides to his personalities, unexplored dimensions to his personality. So that's what E.M. Foster talks about. There are certain situations when it's good to have a two dimensional character or flat character, stock character. A comedian is a comedian. Okay, he is there to give you a comic relief. Yeah, but and flat character is presented without too much of individualizing detail. He is not an individual, he is a character. You see, you look at this guy and you say, yeah, he is a comedian, he is here not for any plot development, just to give us some relief. So, this is not an individual, but a type, and let us get over with it. Again, a flat character is often defined or described in a single phrase or sentence. He can be. Are there any comments? Want to add anything to me? No. A round character, on the other hand, is three-dimensional and is complex in its treatment and its motivation. The representation is imbued with subtle peculiarities. He is more true to life because he is capable of surprising us. So, a round character must necessarily be someone who is unpredictable. Okay. Otherwise, it becomes a flat two-dimensional stock character. A rounded character must have the capacity to surprise us. Henry James, another key feature, these are other key terms that he gives us by way of characterization. See, he has theorized a lot about characterization, the art of characterization. So, you have telling characters and showing characters. Look at the subtle difference. Telling characters, the author intervenes authoritatively in order to describe and to evaluate the motives and dispositional qualities of the character. This is what Jane Austen does in Pride and Prejudice. Does she go at length to describe Elizabeth Bennet? Elizabeth Bennet may be a well-rounded character, I accept, but do you think it is more of a psychological portrait or more of a telling character? It is a telling character. Do you remember a few lines from Pride and Prejudice where she tells you something about every sister and also the parents? This is the kind of woman Mrs. Bennet is. We know from the beginning. We do not have to read between lines to understand her motivation and her character. All right. But tell me some character that you feel is very, author has intervened and told us quite a lot about this. We know, she is a good girl, period. Do not expect any surprises here. When she is bad, I will let you know. Okay, then also I will let you know, but I will let you know. So, I am telling you that you have to right now consider this girl as a very good model girl, okay, a model student. But when I feel that this girl is not so model, I will tell you that also. So, the author is going to take it upon himself herself to tell you what the character is going to be. So, it is very important concept in cinema also, especially in old kind of films, you know, you had people talking about the character. You know, my son will come studying in London. All heroes used to go to London once upon a time, the rich people, boys from the wealthier families. So, hero would always, and he will come. So, you have already been told all this. He is a very obedient, my son is a very obedient girl, boy, he is going to marry any girl of my choice. You are being told that this is the kind of hero you should be expecting. A good boy, an educated boy, and yeah, it is not like someone who will suddenly emerge from nowhere, as in Ram Gopal Verma's Satya. Is there any telling about him? Do you know anything about Satya? Okay. He just emerges, erupts on the scene, and he is showing you this is a guy. Try to make out whatever you want to make out of this guy, but this is a guy. Okay, I am not going to tell you anything about him. You just see. So, show a character. On the other hand, you have showing character. This is also known as the dramatic method. Readers or viewers infer what motives and dispositions lie behind what they say or do. They show a character. Now, can you give me some examples here?
To Kill a Mockingbird, To Kill a Mockingbird, you can talk about
Atticus?
I mean, he was like, he used to say, don't judge a person on, so we know that he's like, he doesn't used to judge a person on, when he used to say, right?
I am more interested in a character, literary character, where the author just shows a character and does not go deep into telling you about. I can right now think of a very good postmodernist novel, The English Patient. Okay. Are you aware of The English Patient? Yeah, Michael Ondaatye's novel. Now, there is an English, yes?
Catcher in the Rye.
Yes, Catcher in the Rye. Good, yeah, the Catcher in the Rye, the hero Holden Caulfield, and you have The English Patient, where even the identity of the patient is suspect. Who is he? Okay. You are just shown a burnt man lying somewhere in Italy in a villa, okay, and he's charred, his body is badly bruised, burnt, and he is just waiting for his death. No one is telling you his motivation, his psychological turmoils, or you are just shown this person, and then when he starts talking, you have to connect the dots and put together the jigsaw puzzle and try to sort it. So, it is a guessing game kind of a novel. You have to be constantly on alert. You can't just, you cannot, this is a kind of novel which cannot be serialized and produced or written in installments, that next to be continued. You have to read it, you miss a clue and then you miss the entire puzzle. So, that is and according to Henry James, of course, showing method is more effective, it is more dramatic. Now, I will compare James to another major writer of his age, Gustave Flaubert, who wrote Madame Bovary. And people like James and Flaubert, they consider telling a violation of artistry. A good artist should show and not tell. Therefore, you are never told much about Emma Bovary, right? You are not explained, nobody goes at great lengths to explain her character and her motivation. They Flaubert and James, they recommend only showing characters. Again, we are in the realm of literary criticism, how a work should be judged. Authors should abstain from judging or making moral imperatives about characters. This is important. Okay. Dickens judges, right? Constantly he judges. More modern writers, they shun from judging characters. Again, the concept of objectivity and impersonality. They have to be judged objectively and impersonally. Do not get emotionally involved with the characters. Any comments so far on anything that I have been going on? Questions? Try to connect it with whatever you have done. You have done so much of fiction and literature already. Tell me something that I do not know. Yeah. So, the title itself suggests portrait of a lady, that means it is about a lady, okay, and it is a portrait. So, let me also introduce you to this term Bildungsroman, and you already know that it is a German term, literally it means a formation novel, an upbringing or education novel. Whose novel, whose education, not ours, but the characters, how the characters and the lead character is educated. That means how he learns, how he grows. So, Portrait of a Lady too is a novel which can be considered a sort of Bildungsroman, an account of the youthful development of its young protagonist. When we are first introduced to her, she is something else. Over a period of time, she turns into something else altogether, and influences on the protagonist. This is important feature of, this is a very important feature of Bildungsroman, who is always influenced by an older, more worldly character. Now, the character of Madame Merle in The Portrait of a Lady. I will read you these a few lines. They appear quite later in the novel, but anyway, Madame Merle's influence on our young heroine. When Madame Merle was neither writing nor painting nor touching the piano, she was usually employed upon wonderful tasks of rich embroidery, cushions, curtains, decorations for the chimney piece, an art in which her bold, free invention was as noted as the agility of her needle. She was never idle, for when engaged in none of the ways I have mentioned, she was either reading, she appeared to Isabel to read everything important, or walking out, or playing patience with the cards, or talking with her fellow inmates. And with all this, she had always the social quality, was never rudely absent, yet never too seated. She laid down her pastimes as easily as she took them up. She worked and talked at the same time, and appeared to impute scant worth to anything she did. She gave away her sketches and tapestries. She rose from the piano or remained there according to the convenience of her auditors, which she always unerringly divined. Unerringly divined. Now, Madame Merle and young Isabel Archer, what do you infer from this? Madame Merle is an older, elegant, mature and much more worldly woman. Isabel Archer has everything, okay, except experience. And what this young impressionable woman, what does she gather from Madame Merle? Well, she becomes a sort of role model. She has everything. She can play the piano. I mean, we are talking about women of that century, remember. So, you do not have to, I mean, that is what accomplishment was for women of that particular century. So, she could read, and she had read everything important. She perhaps extremely, philosophy, history, arts and all. So, she was an accomplished reader. She could play the piano again, which is an important part of a society of that nature. She could play an instrument, and that to piano. So, it denotes a certain finesse, certain kind of elegance of character. She was very good with handiwork like embroidery, and she was graceful. She was a good conversationalist, she was a good listener, she was a good speaker. Okay, so what more can you aspire to be? Okay, she dresses well and she is beautiful. So she becomes a sort of, so that is what we are talking about. In Bildungsroma you always have a, a mentor. Okay, a character has to be mentored, and Madame Merle is a mentor. Now, whether it is a positive or a negative influence, that you will learn later. However, Isabel Archer gets a mentor. Okay. Bildungsroma also describes the processes by which maturity is achieved through the ups and downs of life. So, this is something that you will come across in the Portrait of a Lady, how Isabel goes through the rigor of life and attains maturity. And of course, one of the most important Bildungsroma of all times is Goethe's Sorrows of Young Werther. Okay. There is always a discovery, and most of the time the revelation is self revelation and self discovery, not something, it is not a suspense novel. She realizes something about herself at the end, but perhaps by then it is too late. However, she attains maturity, she gains experience through that, and the growth is complete. So, that is Bildungsroma for you. Now, destiny plays a very important part in all Henry James's novels. We have already talked about that in his preface. He describes Isabel Archer as a young woman who affronts her destiny. At one place, while talking about one of her suitors, Caspar Goodwood, she says, sometimes Caspar Goodwood had seemed to range himself on the side of her destiny. He is the man she was destined to marry. And destiny is constantly referred to throughout the novel. Is that I can't escape my fate, she says later in the novel. Henry James was very apt at sketching women protagonists, and Isabel Archer can easily be considered a sort of new woman of the 19th century, the late 19th century, and she can be placed aside some of the best portrayed heroines of that period. Okay, so, you have great heroines like Elizabeth Bennet, Catherine Earnshaw from Elizabeth Bennet is Pride and Prejudice. Catherine Earnshaw, well, you like gothic kind of novels. Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff and Catherine, yes. Jane Eyre, Becky Shaw from Vanity Fair, Thackeray. Haven't you heard of Thackeray? Yeah. William Makepeace Thackeray, Vanity Fair. Dorothy Brooks is a character from, well, these are the seminal feminist heroines. You can't do feminism without them, these heroines. George Eliot's Middlemarch. We are also given another term, ratiocination, that is to reason methodically and logically, and this is the point where Isabel Archer differs from all these great heroines, because whatever she does, she is impulsive, but in her mind she seems to have given it a lot of thought and she seems to have rationalized a lot. Okay. She may have been utterly wrong about her rationalizations, but she does try to reason out things. She does try to think logically, unlike Catherine Earnshaw, who is extremely wild and whimsical and passionate. Okay. Isabel Archer has no such assumptions. She thinks that she is very rational, she thinks she is very logical and very reasonable. Okay. Jane Eyre reasons methodically and logically all the time. No, she takes life as it comes. She does not have too much of a choice over here. She does not, yeah, but here Isabel Archer is constantly, she is one of the foremost intellectual heroines. So, she tries to intellectualize everything. You have to read the novel to understand, and how does she is as different from Becky Sharp and Jane Eyre. Becky Sharp is also, but in a manipulative sort of way. Her trip is how to hook the richest guy around. Okay, so she is one of those heroines.
But Isabel also dwells a lot upon herself.
That's what I am saying.
So does Bennet, Elizabeth Bennet, who is also a little narcissistic.
Elizabeth Bennet is, well, I am talking about portrayal of intellectual depth. Okay, now Jane Austen herself did not have that kind of intellectual depth to impose such constraints on her characters. Okay, but Henry James did. So, you have to keep those novels side by side and understand that how far is Henry James able to probe into the psyche of his characters, especially his women characters, which people like Jane Austen do not. Okay. At the end of the day, Pride and Prejudice is every girl's dream come true. It is still a fairy tale, is a perfect, once upon a time and happily ever after. Okay, so that's the kinds of times, and that's the kind of person that she was, Jane Austen. But Henry James was much more travelled. He had seen the world. He was very worldly. So therefore, his characters reflect that, and there is a growth, a sense of growth. That's what separates his heroines from the other heroines. There is an immense sense of psychological growth, intellectual development. So, it is all intellectual, it is less passion, less emotion, more intellect. Again we come to the concept of innocence in James, and his fiction is constructed around a series of innocence, and every novel of his has an innocence. So, you have Daisy Miller, you have Isabel Archer, of course, you have the protagonist in The American, you have the Bostonians, and also all these are innocents suddenly transformed in an epiphanic insight into an evil concealed behind the mask of, and this is important. There is always an epiphany. You know what is an epiphany? Sudden realization of something, or awareness of an evil concealed behind the mask of social, civilized and aesthetic being. The chief idea in James' characters is again that characters are often blinded by their cultural innocence, and therefore, I talk about the idea of the American, the innocent American. They are innocent people, therefore, they get deceived by the civilized, sophisticated, worldly people. Most of them are Europeans, and only on foreign ground can they recognize the other. Okay, there is always a binary, there is the other for the Henry James characters, the innocent abroad and the evil European. And self-realization happens only when they come into contact with this evil other. This recognition awakens their conscience out of its submersion in mundane social realism or the lure of the aesthetics. Now, why do I use the term lure of the aesthetics? Why? What is lure of the aesthetics? The term is lure of the aesthetics.
The characters are so taken by their surroundings initially, like when Isabel walks in and she calls it a novel. The place looks like a novel.
Novel setting, picture perfect.
And then suddenly, when they get the epiphany, they realize that there's much more to it than how it is.
So, overpowering aura of aesthetics, and this is, that means the idea should be, the implicit idea should be that Americans are aesthetically not so developed, right. And it is only when, and see, we are now talking about the Americans of the late 19th, early 20th century. okay, when America was still a young modern country and Europe was already old ancient civilization. So, naturally there is no comparison between the levels of aesthetic development in terms of art and culture and society. So, a young American always gets overpowered, overwhelmed by this aura, and that is what happens to her also. She gets overpowered by the aesthetics of Gilbert Osmond, who she ends up marrying. Okay, so when we meet next, I would expect you to have read, you have already read till chapter 12. So, read till chapter 30, 30, okay, and we will now look at. So, I will be starting from chapter 16 where Caspar Goodwood enters the scene, and then we will connect it to the. So, it is important that we get the chapters covered till chapter 30th. Thank you then.